Hi, my name is Pedro Moreira Silva, and I'm a UX functional lead for the AI integration working group and a staff product designer at GitLab. And today I'm going to talk with you about the UX maturity of AI assisted features, which essentially is about when it's okay to move a feature from experiment to beta and from beta to generally available, GA, from a UX perspective. So let's talk about the context first. As part of the AI integration effort, we have a goal to deliver 32 experiment, 12 beta, and 8 GA features across the product that are AI assisted until the end of July 2023. And in addition, product leadership is clear on how usability is critical to mature AI features from experiment all the way to GA. Check the links in the slide to learn more about this. And indicating feature maturity as experiment, beta, or GA is a way to set expectations for customers and users about availability, support, and perhaps most importantly, the quality of the features. And on quality, the experiment, beta, GA docs are ambiguous about the UX maturity of features. For example, in beta, as we see here, what does UX complete or near completion mean? And so how might we help teams more clearly know when it's okay to move from an experiment to GA? And so the following criteria and requirements focus on the UX aspect of the maturity of AI assisted features. Other aspects like stability or documentation must also be taken into account so that we can determine the appropriate feature maturity. So our goals when we set out to compile all of these criteria and requirements were helping to set consistent expectations, provide teams with a clear and objective process, increase the quality and rigor of evaluating the UX, help balance experimentation and velocity with quality, and use existing methods and benchmarks of user experience. And all of this is specific to AI assisted features. And you might be asking, why is this so specific? So in the AI integration effort, teams are encouraged to prototype and ship experiments fast so that they can assess the feasibility and also the potential value. And then teams work to mature them to beta and GA. And this, as you might have noticed, is slightly different from what we normally do. Usually features are shipped straight to GA. There's no experiment or beta phase. And in part, because the product development flow does not take into account the maturing of features through these phases. And also, in the end, this is specific to AI-assisted features because this is a new and slightly different way of working. And so we don't want to apply the UX requirements that I'm going to share with you to all features and all of the product developments that we do on non-AI features. We want to do that with appropriate diligence. So maybe in the future, we can take inspiration from these requirements and integrate feature maturity in the product development flow. You can learn more in the frequently asked question link from this slide. So to evaluate the UX maturity of AI-assisted features, we use 3 criteria from the product development flow. Validation, problem validation, how well do we understand the problem? Solution validation, how usable is the solution? And then in the build track, improve phase, how successful is the solution? And a 4th criterion related to design standards. How compliant is the solution with our design standards? So let's take a look at a summary of how these criteria map to the requirements. So this is a very brief summary, and I invite you to check the complete requirements in the internal handbook section linked from this slide. In the internal handbook, you can find each criterion explained in full with examples of how this can work in practice and also frequently asked questions. So, first let's focus on the first row, the problem validation. And problem validation, again, is how well do we understand the problem? And we can see that for experiment, we say that it can be based only on assumptions and evidence is not required. And then when we go to beta, we require a mix of evidence and assumptions. And then finally, when features want to get to GA, ideally there's only evidence or at least no high-risk assumptions. And so what are assumptions and evidence? So assumptions are beliefs that are not supported by evidence. And so what teams should do is assess their assumptions and classify them into high or low risk, depending on the probability of being incorrect and the severity of the consequences. And then evidence is, credible information that the team relies on for their actions. And so, for example, evidence can be feedback from users or an issue that has user engagement confirming that the problem exists, or even a series of documented qualitative research from customer interviews. So that can be evidence. So this is a very brief explanation of that part of problem validation. And in the end, this row of problem validation is here with these requirements so it can help teams assess their confidence on how well they know the problem. Solution validation, as we can see here, is about how usable is the solution. And so experiment, it's not required to do any solution validation. To get to beta, we require a grade C, evaluated in half a day by a product designer. And then for GA, we require at least a grade B, which will be evaluated with external users. And I'll get into this more in the next slide. Then the third row, improve, which is in the build track, is when the feature has launched. As we see here, experiment, that is not applicable as there is no data before launch. For beta, the success metrics are defined by the team, and the same thing for GA. Success metrics are defined by the team. And so how successful is the solution? It really depends from feature to feature. But what we want here is to encourage teams to look beyond feature usage as the only success metric and try to include usability signals. And so usability signals can be in terms of how useful, efficient, effective, satisfying the feature is. And we don't want to necessarily equate high usage of a feature to feature success. That is not what it necessarily means. But again, because it really depends from feature to feature, the success metrics are defined by the team. And so ultimately, what the requirement here is that product managers document how the success metrics corroborate that the experience is good enough for the AI-assisted feature to mature from a UX perspective. So we're relying on each team and their product managers to come up with these metrics and have a rationale that they're good enough to move to beta and then to move to GA. And then finally, design standards, very straightforward. To answer how compliant the solution is with our design standards, the teams evaluate the solution's compliance with our pajamas guidelines and also the design and UI changes checklist. And in an experiment, we encourage teams to adhere to these design standards, so it should adhere to them. Beta, the same thing. And then for GA, the solution must be compliant. Sorry, my face is in front of this, but it says must be compliant for GA. So as you can see in the first column for experiment, the minimum requirements to launch an experiment are almost none. And that's intentional to balance experimentation and velocity with quality as experiments mature. And so the caveat here, if you take all of this into account, is that the minimum requirements for beta and GA are slightly more demanding, and teams will need to involve UX if they want to mature their features. So this actually incentivizes teams to involve UX early if they can, so that they can mature features quickly and avoid potential reworking costs. Now let's dig into the solution validation, as we got many different questions about how much effort teams would put into this. So again, how usable is the solution? For experiment, it's not required. And you can also see the rows below that pertain to value that this solution validation brings, what is the rigor and what is the effort that teams must put into it. And if you then look at beta and GA, what we basically try to do here is strive a balance between velocity and quality, increasing the rigor of UX evaluation as feature maturity increases, and also use existing UX methods and benchmarks that teams are familiar with. We're not reinventing the wheel, just using boring solutions, things that we already do. And so the method for beta, as we see here, it's a UX scorecard with a heuristic evaluation. And for GA, it's a UX scorecard with usability testing and heuristic evaluation. And this is something that we already do often. So we periodically do UX scorecards as part of our regular product development. It's not something new, and product designers already have experience with them. So what teams do is grade the experience using the UX scorecard process, which has two possible approaches. For beta, the minimum requirement is the heuristic evaluation approach. And for GA, we require both scorecard approaches for a more robust evaluation. So heuristic evaluation and usability testing. Heuristic evaluation, in a very short answer, is that it can be done in half a day by a product designer. So half a day gets you the information you need to know if your feature can get to beta or not. And so this, what the product designer does is that they review and grade the experience against UX heuristics. And so that's why we see here in this slide that it involves one expert evaluator, ideally the group's product designer. And for usability testing, which is something we add and that increases the value, the rigor, and also the effort for GA, is something that can be done from a day to a week, depending on the complexity of the feature, of setup, and also the recruiting participants. And to grade the experience, a product designer observes representative users completing a set of tasks. And here, at the minimum, we should be testing the feature with 5 external users. And so to recap, in the context of AI-assisted features, we intentionally chose UX scorecards to keep the solution validation as lightweight as possible. So again, please check the complete requirements in the internal handbook section, linked from this slide. In the internal handbook, you can find each criterion expanded in full with examples of how this can work in practice and also frequently asked questions. If you have more questions, reach out to the working group in the Slack channel mentioned here. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye.